This beggar girl reveals a millionaire's hidden child, but when he sees the child's face, he discovers something even worse. Comment what you think will happen, and subscribe to my channel to support my work. The screams slice through the muggy afternoon air like a knife, echoing through the brick streets of Charleston, South Carolina at exactly 3 p.m. Luke Mendenhall, 30, almost dropped his coffee cup as he stepped away from the window of his luxury condo. It was always at the same time, always with the same desperate intensity. For 3 weeks straight, that sound had been coming from the brownstone across the street, a faded yellow two-story building with peeling blue shutters that clashed with the elegance of the modern building where he lived. As the owner of Mendenhall Construction, one of the largest companies in the region, Luke was used to solving complex investment and application problems, but he preferred to stay away from other people's dramas. His green eyes scanned the assets he had built up over the years: penthouse apartment, imported cars in the garage, a fortune accumulated through successful real estate deals. At 30, he was considered one of South Carolina's most promising young entrepreneurs, but he lived immersed in a loneliness that money couldn't fill. Across the street, inside the brownstone, Violet huddled in the corner of the kitchen, her 4 years of age insufficient to understand why her Aunt Carol hated her so much. The 38-year-old woman firmly held a metal spoon that she had heated on the stove, her eyes red from alcohol, fixed on the girl who was trembling before her. "You're a plague on this house," Carol hissed, her voice slurred from the cheap whiskey she had been drinking since noon. "Because of you, my sister is gone. Because of you, I lost everything." The spoon came down hard on Violet's small arm, leaving a red mark that would join the other scars that dotted her thin arms. Violet bit her lip to keep from screaming louder. She had learned that screams only enraged her aunt, who had worked at City Hall until she was fired for constant absences caused by her addiction. The girl closed her eyes and tried to remember her mother's soft voice, Clara, singing that lullaby before she went to sleep. "Stop whining," Carol grunted, putting the spoon away in the cabinet. "Go to your room, and I don't want to see you until tomorrow. And if you get charcoal on the walls again, you'll see what real punishment is." Violet ran to the small room at the back of the house, a stuffy space with an old bed and a crucifix on the wall. There, she curled up in the thin sheet and began to hum her mother's song softly, the only thing that still comforted her. She didn't know that across the street, someone had finally paid attention to that melody. Luke stopped reviewing the contracts when he heard the faint but distinct sound. He knew that song. His mother used to sing it when she was cooking, a popular folk song about free birds. He approached the window again, his eyes scanning the facade of the brownstone. One of the back windows was ajar, and from there came that childish voice, trembling but persistent. For the first time in 3 weeks, Luke felt something other than simple annoyance. There was something in that voice that touched a sensitive chord in his chest, something that reminded him of responsibilities long buried under layers of work and isolation. Next door to the brownstone, Hope Sanders, a 45-year-old caregiver, watered her begonias when she heard the girls singing. During her years caring for neglected children, she had developed an instinct for recognizing childhood suffering, and that voice carried a pain that made her heart clench. "That's strange," she thought, observing the windows of the Santos house, a family she had known for decades. Carol had always been troubled, but since she had taken custody of her orphaned niece, something had changed in the air of that house. The girl never played in the yard, never ran through the streets like the other children in the historic city. Hope dried her hands on her apron and made a decision. The next morning, she would pay a courtesy visit to her neighbor. It had been a long time since she had properly talked to Carol, and maybe it was time to get to know little Violet better. The sun began to set over the mountains that surrounded Charleston when Violet finally fell asleep, exhausted by pain and fear. Her little fingers clutched the sheet, and in her dreams she flew like the birds she secretly drew on the kitchen walls with pieces of charcoal found in the yard. Across the street, Luke closed the curtains and tried to go back to work, but he couldn't concentrate. Something had changed that afternoon, something he didn't yet fully understand. For the first time in years, he felt that maybe it was time to pay attention to what was happening beyond his own windows. Night fell over the historic city, but the echo of that children's song continued to resonate in the mind of a man who had spent years running away from his emotional responsibilities. The next morning brought with it the aroma of fresh bread from the local bakeries and the typical movement of Charleston waking up to another day. Hope put on her best floral dress and combed her graying hair with extra care. There was something in that child's voice that didn't leave her alone, an echo of hopelessness that she recognized from her years caring for at-risk youth. At 9 o'clock sharp, she knocked on the door of the brownstone. The sound echoed through the silent interior until shuffling footsteps approached. Carol opened the door with a puffy face and red eyes, clearly suffering the effects of the previous night's drinking. "Good morning, Carol," Hope said with her gentlest smile. "I came to pay a courtesy visit. It's been so long since we've had a proper chat." Carol hesitated, running a hand through her disheveled hair. "Oh, Hope, it's not a good time. The house is a mess. Imagine, dear. We've been neighbors for so long." Hope took a step forward, forcing Carol to back away. "And I would love to meet your niece. I heard she's an adorable little girl." Carol's face hardened for an instant before forcing a weak smile. "Violet is sick. High fever. Better not get close." At that moment, a soft noise came from the kitchen, the sound of something being dragged on the floor. Hope pricked up her ears, immediately recognizing the sound of a child trying to move silently. "Maybe I can help," the caregiver insisted. "I have experience with sick children. I've taken care of dozens over the years." "No need, no," Carol replied quickly, blocking the entrance with her body. "I already took her to the doctor. It's just a flu. It'll pass soon." Hope noticed Carol's nervous hands, the way she avoided eye contact, and especially the strong smell of alcohol that emanated from her, even though it was so early. All the signs that she had learned to recognize during years dealing with troubled families. Across the street, Luke watched the scene from his window while having breakfast. He had woken up earlier than usual, disturbed by confused dreams where the voice of a child mixed with memories of his own lonely childhood. When he saw Hope at the door of the brownstone, a strange curiosity invaded him. The caregiver finally said goodbye to Carol, but not without casting an inquisitive look into the interior of the house. There was something deeply wrong there, and her experience told her that a child was suffering. As she walked back to her house, she decided that she needed to find a way to verify her suspicions. Inside the brownstone, Carol locked the door tightly and went to the kitchen, where she found Violet squatting behind the table trying to hide. The girl had tried to reach a glass of water from the sink, but her height did not allow it, and she had knocked over a chair in the process. "Didn't I tell you to stay in your room?" Carol snarled, her irritation intensified by the hangover and the unexpected visit. "I was thirsty, Aunt Carol," Violet murmured, her big eyes fixed on the floor. "Thirsty?" Carol laughed bitterly. "You want water? Then go get it in the yard. And since you like to make so much noise, you can stay out there until I decide you can come in." Violet went out to the small backyard, a space surrounded by high walls and dominated by a single magnolia tree. There, she sat on the ground and began to draw with a piece of charcoal that she had found near the stove. They were always birds, small, large, some flying, others perched on imaginary branches. The hours passed slowly. Carol had locked the back door, leaving Violet in the yard under the hot South Carolina midday sun. The girl began to feel dizzy, but she knew that knocking on the door would only result in more punishment. So, she began to hum her mother's song softly, the melody being her only source of comfort. It was this melody that reached Luke's ears again. This time he couldn't ignore it. There was something too familiar in that voice, in that specific song. He picked up his cell phone and, almost without thinking, began to record. He didn't know exactly why, but an instinct told him that he might need that evidence. As he recorded, fragments of memories began to fit together in his mind. Years ago, a construction company employee hummed that same song while organizing the files. Clara, a gentle young woman who had worked for only a few months before disappearing abruptly, always spoke fondly about her little daughter. "Violet," Luke murmured, the cell phone trembling in his hands. Clara's daughter was called Violet. The realization hit him like a punch in the stomach. The child who was suffering in the house across the street was the daughter of his former employee, the gentle woman who had worked for him 2 years before simply disappearing. How hadn't he made that connection before? Luke put away his cell phone and began to pace back and forth in his apartment. He vaguely remembered Clara mentioning family problems, a sister she didn't get along with, financial difficulties. But he was so absorbed in his own business at the time, expanding the company, investing his profits in new ventures, that he hadn't paid due attention. Now, 2 years later, Clara's daughter was across the street, and from the sounds that came from that house, she wasn't in a good situation. The guilt that Luke carried for having been a distant boss multiplied, now including regret for not having helped Clara when she clearly needed it. At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, punctually, the screams started again. This time, Luke didn't step away from the window. He watched with growing horror as, through the kitchen window of the brownstone, he saw a female silhouette moving aggressively. He picked up his cell phone again and began to record, this time with more determination. What he saw through the cell phone screen made him nauseous. Carol was holding something in her hands. It seemed to be a kitchen utensil, and gesturing violently in the direction of a small figure that he could barely distinguish. Violet's screams echoed through the afternoon, and this time Luke couldn't pretend they were just childish tantrums. When silence returned, he remained at the window for a few more minutes, his heart pounding in his chest. He had just witnessed something that would change everything. The question now was, what would he do with this information? That night, Violet slept on the floor of the yard, where Carol had left her as punishment for making too much noise during the afternoon. The girl curled up in her own shirt and looked at the stars through the branches of the magnolia tree. In her 4-year-old mind, she made a silent wish to her mother, wherever she was, that someone, anyone, would take her out of that place of pain. Across the street, Luke couldn't sleep, tormented by the certainty that he needed to act, but paralyzed by the same emotional inertia that had consumed him since he became obsessed only with expanding his wealth, completely forgetting about the people around him. 3 days had passed since Luke discovered the child's identity, and guilt consumed him like a slow fire. During those days, he had systematically documented the episodes of violence, always at 3 in the afternoon, always with the same methodical brutality. His collection of videos and audios grew, but his courage to act remained paralyzed by the same cowardice that had haunted him since he lost his parents in an accident when he was only 17 years old. On that Thursday morning, Hope made a decision that would change the course of everything. She had spent the night awake, tormented by the certainty that a child was suffering a few feet from her house. Her 4 decades caring for abandoned children had taught her to recognize the signs, and all of them were present in the Santos brownstone. She decided to approach the situation differently. Instead of attempting a new direct visit to Carol, she opted for a more subtle strategy. At 7 in the morning, she positioned herself in the side yard of her house, the place from where she had the best view of the backyard of the brownstone. What she saw horrified her. Violet was sitting under the magnolia tree, completely alone, wearing only a torn shirt and underwear. Her small arms were marked by obvious burns, some still red and inflamed. The girl was drawing on the ground with a piece of charcoal, creating shapes that Hope recognized as birds. "My God," the caregiver whispered, her hands trembling as she held the fence that separated the yards. It was worse than she imagined. Much worse. Violet looked up and saw the lady watching her. For a moment, the two stared at each other in silence. Then, to Hope's surprise, the girl smiled, a weak but genuine smile, and waved shyly. "Hi, Mrs. Sanders," Violet said with her tiny voice. "Hi, my dear," replied Hope, struggling to keep her voice steady. "Are you all right?" Violet looked quickly at the windows of the house before answering. "I'm fine. I'm just drawing birds." "That's nice. Do you like birds?" "I like them a lot. They can fly wherever they want," replied the girl, her big eyes shining with a sadness that broke Hope's heart. At that moment, Carol's rough voice echoed from inside the house. "Violet! Where are you, girl?" The terror that instantly took over the child's face said everything Hope needed to know. Violet got up quickly, wiped her hands on her shirt and ran inside the house, but not before looking at Hope one more time with an expression that screamed for help. Hope remained in the yard for a few more minutes, processing what she had seen. The burns, the fear, the way the child reacted to her aunt's voice, everything confirmed her worst fears. She could no longer pretend that she didn't know what was happening. Across the street, Luke had witnessed the entire interaction. Through his window, he could see the Santos's backyard partially, and the sight of the marks on Violet's arms made him sick. For the first time in years, he felt genuine fury burning in his chest. Clara had trusted him in some way. Even if indirectly, even if he didn't know it at the time, she had left her daughter in the care of a family that lived in the same city where he lived. And now that child was being tortured while he watched from his comfortable window, counting his investments and applications as if they were more important than a human life. At 11 o'clock in the morning, Hope made a courageous decision. She put on her best Sunday dress, took a tray of homemade cookies that she had prepared as a pretext, and headed again to the brownstone. This time, she wouldn't take no for an answer. Carol answered the door reluctantly, clearly annoyed by the neighbor's insistence. "Hope, I already told you that it's not a good time." "Carol, dear, I brought some cookies I made yesterday," Hope interrupted firmly. "And I insist on getting to know little Violet better. As long-time neighbors, it's our duty to support each other." Before Carol could protest, Hope had already entered the house, using all the authority that decades of childcare had given her. The interior of the brownstone was dark and smelled of mildew mixed with alcohol. Old and poorly maintained furniture occupied the living room, and there was a heavy atmosphere that made the air seem difficult to breathe. "Violet is sleeping," Carol lied, blocking the way to the back of the house. "That's a shame. Maybe another time then," said Hope, but her experienced eyes had already catalogued several disturbing details. Dark stains on the kitchen floor that appeared to have been poorly cleaned, a metal spoon left on the stove, and mainly small charcoal drawings on the walls that had clearly been made by a child. At that moment, a low sound came from the direction of the kitchen, a muffled sob, almost imperceptible. Hope and Carol froze. The silence that followed was tense and revealing. "It must be the neighbor's cat," Carol said quickly, but her voice trembled slightly. Hope smiled and nodded, but had decided she'd already seen enough. "Well, I'll let you rest then. But Carol, remember that I'm always next door if you need anything at all." Hope's tone made it clear that it wasn't just a casual offer of help. It was a subtle but direct warning. After the caregiver left, Carol locked the door tightly and went to the kitchen, where she found Violet huddled behind the stove, trying to hide. The girl had cried upon hearing Hope's gentle voice, remembering the kindness she had once known. "You were making noise," Carol accused, her eyes already gleaming with the familiar fury. "No, Aunt Carol, I didn't make noise," Violet protested, but her small voice sounded weak even to her. Carol picked up the metal spoon that was on the stove and placed it directly in the flame. Violet recognized the ritual and began to tremble. She knew what was coming next. "You want to attract attention, don't you?" Carol hissed as the spoon heated up. "You want the neighbors to come here and ask questions. You think I don't know how to take care of you." Across the street, Luke had positioned his cell phone on the window and was recording again. This time, he managed to capture not only the sounds, but also partial images through the kitchen window. What he saw made him make a decision that would change everything. He could no longer be just a silent observer. All the capital he had accumulated, all the wealth he kept in his bank accounts and cryptocurrencies, was worth nothing if he couldn't protect an innocent child. Clara had been a good person, a dedicated employee who always spoke of her daughter with love. That child was his responsibility now, whether he wanted it or not. While Violet suffered another episode of systematic torture, Luke made a call that he hadn't made in months. He called Dr. Robert Mendez, his personal lawyer and old college friend. "Robert, I need your help with a delicate situation," he said, watching through the window as Violet's screams echoed through the afternoon. "It's about a child, and I think it could be a matter of life." That night, after Carol fell asleep drunk on the living room sofa, Violet managed to quietly slip out into the yard. Her new burns stung, but the physical pain was less than the pain in her heart. She sat under the magnolia tree and looked at the stars, humming her mother's song softly. What she didn't know was that, for the first time in months, two people were truly paying attention to her suffering. And that, in the coming days, her life would change in ways she couldn't even imagine. Dr. Robert Mendez arrived at Luke's apartment on Friday morning with a grave expression on his face. The two men had been classmates at the university almost a decade ago, and Robert knew well the emotional isolation that his friend had built after losing his parents. That's why the urgent phone call the night before had surprised him so much. "Luke, I need you to tell me exactly what's going on," said Robert, sitting in the spacious living room of the apartment. "You talked about a child in danger, but I need details." Luke poured coffee and positioned himself near the window, the place that had become his obsession in recent days. "The girl who lives in the house across the street is the daughter of a former employee of mine, Clara Santos. She's being mistreated by the aunt who cares for her." "Mistreated how?" asked Robert, taking a notepad from his briefcase. "Burns, daily screams, neglect." Luke paused, struggling with the words. "I have recordings, Robert. Evidence of what's happening." Robert watched the videos in growing silence, his face paling with each scene. As a lawyer specializing in family law, he had seen many cases of child abuse, but something in the systematization of that violence disturbed him deeply. "Luke, we can't wait any longer. I need you to give me all these recordings today. I'm going to contact Child Protective Services and the district attorney. This child needs to be removed from that house immediately." While the two men planned the intervention, across the street, Violet lived another day of terror. Carol had woken up with a particularly severe hangover and discovered that there was no more alcohol in the house. Her irritation multiplied when she found new drawings of birds that Violet had made on the kitchen wall during the early morning. "How many times do I have to tell you not to get the walls dirty?" Carol screamed, holding Violet by the arm tightly enough to leave marks. "You're a plague, a curse on this house," Violet tried to explain, to say that she had dreamed of her mother and that the drawings made her feel less alone, but the words were lost in sobs. At 4 years old, she still didn't fully understand why her aunt hated her so much, why each day brought new pain. It was at this moment that Hope, who had spent the entire night thinking about the situation, made a definitive decision. She could no longer wait for others to act. She went directly to the small office of Child Protective Services in downtown Charleston. "I need to make an urgent report about a child in a situation of abuse," she told social worker Anna Beatrice, an experienced professional who she had known for years. Anna straightened up in her chair, her expression immediately becoming serious. "Tell me everything, Hope." While Hope reported her detailed observations across town, Robert was in a similar meeting in the district attorney's office. District Attorney Lucas Andrade listened attentively while Robert presented the evidence collected by Luke. "It's compelling evidence," said the prosecutor, examining the videos on Robert's cell phone. "I will order an immediate investigation and request the removal of the child from the family environment." "How long will it take?" asked Robert, worried. "With this evidence, we can act today," replied Lucas. It was in this way that, by a coincidence that would change Violet's destiny, two simultaneous reports arrived at Child Protective Services on the same morning. Ana Beatriz was finishing noting down Hope's account when her phone rang. "Ana, this is District Attorney Lucas Andrade. I need you to make an urgent intervention in a house on Brick Street. We have evidence of serious child abuse." "Is it number 127 by any chance? Yellow brownstone?" asked Anna, surprised. "Exactly. How did you know?" "I just received a report about the same house. Two independent sources confirm the seriousness of the situation." At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, a coordinated operation was being set up. Ana Beatriz, accompanied by 2 social workers and a bailiff, was heading to Brick Street. Hope had offered to accompany the team, using her experience with traumatized children. Luke watched everything from his window, his heart pounding in his chest. Finally, after days of paralysis, he had managed to act. Robert was by his side, both witnessing the moment that would change Violet's life forever. In the Santos's house, Carol had gone out to buy alcohol at the bar downtown, leaving Violet locked in the stuffy room. The girl continued singing softly, unaware that her life was about to change radically. When Ana Beatriz knocked on the door of the brownstone and didn't get an answer, she used her legal authority to enter the property. What they found inside exceeded even their worst expectations. A dirty and poorly maintained house, strong smell of alcohol, and obvious signs of neglect in all the rooms. It was Hope who first heard the faint voice coming from the room at the back. "There's someone here," she said, guiding the team through the hallway. When they opened the door of the room and found Violet curled up in the corner, singing her sad song, everyone present felt a squeeze in their heart. The girl looked up with big and scared eyes, not understanding who those people were or what they wanted from her. "Hi, my dear," said Ana Beatriz, crouching down to be at the child's height. "My name is Anna. We came to help you." Violet looked at Hope, recognizing the gentle lady who had talked to her in the yard. A glimmer of hope shone in her eyes, but was quickly replaced by fear. "Aunt Carol is going to be angry," she whispered. "You don't need to worry about that now," said Hope, reaching out to the girl. "We're going to get out of here, okay?" But the great turning point was still to come. When they came out of the house, Luke was waiting for them on the sidewalk, having come down from his apartment for the first time in weeks to face his responsibilities head-on. "Violet," he said softly, crouching down to the girl's height. "Do you remember me? I knew your mother, Clara." Violet's eyes widened. "You knew my mother?" "Yes, I did. She worked for me, and she always spoke of you with great love." Luke felt the tears in his eyes. "She told me you liked to draw birds." Violet nodded shyly and then, to everyone's surprise, asked, "Can you take me to fly like the birds?" At that moment, Luke understood that all his wealth, all his investments and applications, all his fortune built over the years had only one real purpose: to give that child the chance to fly again. "I can," he replied, his voice choked with emotion. "I'm going to take care of you as your mother would have wanted me to do." 6 months later, Violet ran through the garden of Luke's house, her healed arms outstretched like wings. Pretending to be one of the birds, she now drew no longer with charcoal on the walls, but with colored pencils in notebooks full of happy stories. Luke had discovered that the true value of his fortune was not in the numbers of his bank accounts, but in the laughter of a girl who had learned to fly again. Hope visited them every week, bringing homemade cookies and stories of other children who had also found a new home. And every night, When Luke put Violet to sleep, she sang the song that her mother had taught her, no longer a sad song of pain, but a melody of hope that echoed through the house, reminding them that love always finds a way to transform even the most closed hearts. If you enjoyed this wonderful story, please comment. Your opinion is very important. And if you love beautiful stories, subscribe to my channel. I promise to make your day better with my videos.